This is going to be a short video telling you how to play the short Pick Up and Deliver game via Nebula by Martin Wallace. First, play the board nice and flat. This is the beginner side of the board. There is an advanced side of the board on the other side. Place all your resources near to the board. Place the end of game card in the end of game card position. Deal out 2 private contracts to every player you have in the game. Say we're playing a 3-player game, everyone would take their private contracts. And then deal out the open contracts, put them here, and lay 4 down here. Each player takes a game board like this. This number here shows you how many people you're playing with. So in a 2-player game, you take this side, and you take slightly different numbers of tiles. We're setting out a 3-player game here, so we'll play with this side here. At this stage here, you probably want to populate your game board. So if we were playing a 2-player game, the factory tiles you would take would be these full hex ones. Because we're playing a 3-player game, you take these half text tiles like that. You can also place all your buildings, and the number you get is the same irrespective of the number of players, like this. You don't have to do it like that. And then also your workers, like this. If you're playing on the other side, which is the 2-player side, you'd actually take an additional worker. These numbers here tell you how many of these sort of terrain hexes you'll be taking depending on the number of players. Because we're playing a 3-player game, you stack little piles of 4 like that. All players do this. Any additional remaining terrain hexes are put in the box, though can be used in the game if you were to run out. Find these special exploitation tokens. They're the ones that have 5 on them. 5, 5, 5. And each one of these corresponds to the 5 resources in the game. So you've got one that corresponds to brick, one that corresponds to wood, one that corresponds to, this is stone, this is a resource of pig, if a weird one, and a resource on wheat or corn or whatever. Okay. Take these here, shuffle them up, blah 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 blah. Take one out, return it to the box, it's not used in the game, and then place the others in a little pile like that. Get all the additional ones, so the ones that aren't special exploitation tiles, just normal tiles, shuffle them in, perhaps in a slightly better way than the way I'm doing now. Once you've done that, you want to place these mixture of normal exploitation tiles and special exploitation tiles onto the meadow slots of the board. Now, what is a meadow slot? It is basically any slot which is empty. So, for instance, this is a meadow slot, this is a meadow slot. So the green ones, with the exception of these, which are ruins. These areas here are all fogged up. Yeah? The ones which are fogged with trees are called petrified forests. And these ones with kind of swamps and monsters on them, you can actually never play on in the game. So what you're going to do is I'm going to randomly attribute all of these tokens to the meadow slots on the board, yeah? So there you go. Now what you're going to do is you're going to flip all of these over. There you go. So all the exploitation tokens are flipped. Then what you do is you find the special ones, like this one here for bricks, and then you actually put those bricks onto the board. Now, this little thing here is reminding you that with a 2 or 3-player game, you always put one less resource than the number shown. So this token was here. I will be replacing it with, because it's a 3-player game, 4 bricks, like that. So there, I've done that. I've actually fudged the board a little bit because actually, due to my poor shuffling, those special exploitation tokens seem to all be down here. So I took the pig one off and put it here, I took the stone one off and put it here, I took the wheat one off and put it here, and the bricks was already here. And that's your starting board. So what can you do on a turn? You can do various actions on a turn. These images that show you the actions that you can do, and the little clock symbols show you how many points of your time they take up. So on any turn, you can do 2 actions, yeah? So placing a guy costs 1, placing a factory costs 1, placing a meadow tile costs 1, placing a meadow tile on a petrified forest, which I'll explain later, costs 2, transporting a resource to a factory costs 1, and then building one of these buildings costs 1 as well. So basically everything costs 1, with the exception of placing a meadow tile on a petrified forest. One thing you can do is you can open an exploitation token. I'll show you how that works. So you take a worker off your board, and you pick one of the non-special exploitation tokens, the only ones that are on the board. Say I choose pig. What I do is I take this token, I place it next to my board, face down. It's going to give me 2 points at the end of the game, and then I replace where it was with a number of resources shown. So again, because it's a 3-player game, I'll take 3 pigs. And then you place the 3 pigs. Next thing you can do is on an empty space, you can place a factory. So this is a factory here. As I've said, if it was a 2-player game, you play with this full hex factory, but in a 3- and 4-player game, you play with these half hex factories. The reason is because in a single hex on the board, you can actually have 2 factories. Before I show you myself placing a factory, it's probably worth saying that actually there are no available slots on the board. They're all either filled with fog, they're ruins which can have factories built on them, or they have exploitation tokens, which means I cannot build a factory on them. How do you free them up? Well, you free them up by placing these. This is, again, one of your actions that you can do on your turn. So for instance, you could place this over the fog there. There are some rules, however, on placement. When you're choosing to place a meadow tile, or meadow hexagon, it has to go adjacent to one of your open exploitation tokens. So this is my white player here. I opened this token by placing him down. It means I can play here because it is adjacent. Okay. The other place you can legally play is you can play then adjacent to your exploitation token again, or adjacent to an empty space. This is an empty space. I can then play here. Okay. You could also play here, but because it's a petrified forest, that would take 2 of your action points. You might notice that these meadow tiles are stacked into little piles. As for setup, you always remove them from the left to the right. So if I was to place 2 more, I would open up this slot, and you'll see a little 2 there, just like the 2 on my exploitation token that I've already taken. That's going to give you 2 points at the end. Anyone who's ever played Terra Mystica or Eclipse or something like that will be familiar with this idea of taking things off your board and then points or abilities being hidden underneath. So why are you emptying up these spaces? Well, you're emptying up these spaces because eventually you want to transport resources one at a time along empty spaces to factories. Okay, so now let me place a factory. One of your actions you can do, as I've said, is placing a factory. So I could place one of my factories down there. In the 3- and 4-player game, you use these half-hex factories rather than these full-hex factories in the 2-player game. In the 3- or 4-player game, the board's a bit more crowded. The reason why I use the half-hexes is because another player could actually play a factory down like that. Okay. Say these were empty spaces. Now I could transport goods from, say, an open exploitation token down here on the board, and the goods came up. It doesn't actually matter that my factory's there. As long as I can get onto the hex from any direction, I can place the goods onto my factory. So I've mentioned some of the things you can do with your actions. Another thing you can do is you can transport resources from open exploitation tokens. So for instance, I could transport this pig along this empty route to there. And then if I had another action to use, you always have 2. I could transport this brick from there to there. It's important to say, though, it doesn't have to be your exploitation token. It could be actually a worker or whatever they're called of another player marking theirs. You can basically sort of steal their resources and move it to your factory. Just to say again, it's only these meadow tiles which are considered empty. So in the game, you're going to have to use actions to explore fog areas to make clear paths. Here, the demonstration I'm giving you is actually a very, very short path, but the path could be all the way across the board. Also, the meadows, irrespective of who plays them, can be used by anyone. So once a meadow is down, that's considered an open route. So as I've said, you can use one of your actions to transport a resource from an exploitation token to your factory. You can't transport one to someone else's factory. You can only transport them to your own, and they just sit on the factory there. Well, why would you do that? Well, if you have enough resources on a factory and it matches these symbols here, this is one of the open contract cards from the top of the board. You can just, for one of your actions, just fulfill this contract here. So if you were fulfilling the contract, you would take the resources here. So I need, for this card, I need a wheat, a pig, and a brick. They come off and they go back in the box. Yeah. I complete this contract. The factory comes off the board and then back onto my player mat. I'm going to store this face down on my side of the board. It's going to give me 3 points at the end of the game. And then all contracts give you, well, some of them do nothing, yeah, but nearly all of them have a special ability. This one says swap one of your resources with one from the general reserve. Well, what does swap one of your resources mean? Well, I find that when you're playing the game, the rule book is actually very, very useful, and it will tell you what all the cards do. So, for instance, store, of which there's 6 in the game, means you could swap a resource from one of your exploitation tokens or one of your building sites. When you complete a contract, you're actually building a building. The contract is for a building. I don't know why, pigs would be required to build a building, but they are. What you do is when the factory, say it was there, is removed with the resources, you take off the factory and then you drop down a building like that. And each space has the ability to have up to 2 buildings on it, which could be both of yours or one of yours and one of another player's. Say you wanted to complete this contract, however, which costs a pig and a wood. And you have a pig, a wood and a stone on your building site. The reason you had that is perhaps you were going for something else and then someone else took it. Well, you can still complete that contract. So you take the contract, put it face down in front of you to say it's completed. You take the 2 resources that it cost to do and put them back in the box. Your factory would come off and a house would go down. But what do you do with this additional stone? You place it here on your player mat, and actually every resource that you do not use costs you -1 points at the end of the game. The fulfilling of a contract and the placing of a building is actually just one action. So for one action you would take the resources on your building site, take them off and the building site and place a building down. That would be one of your actions. If you happen to have another one, you could do something else additional on your turn. All the various contract cards give you some sort of ability when you complete them, so you can build that into your long-term strategy in terms of which contracts you wish to complete. Though it's worth noticing that except for the 2 purple cards you're given at the beginning, the contracts you'll be taking are actually from this available row here. So if someone takes one before you, it's gone, and another card comes out from the deck to replace it. One of the final things to say is when you actually all these resources, say from this exploitation site, are gone, used by this player, used by other players, then this worker comes back off and back onto your player mat to be played again later if you wish. If we go back to the player mat, when the player has played all 5 of their buildings onto the board, so one's already on, I've got 4 left, that person would get this card here, which is the end of game card, which will give them an additional 2 points in scoring. Everyone else at that point gets another turn each, and then the game ends, and then you add up your score. So what the game's really about is how do you economically place your workers onto board, opening exploitation tokens that aren't necessarily useful for your opponents. The way you'd know that is you could look at the open contracts on the board, but you won't know what their private contracts are from the beginning of the game. Trying to use the resources that are there with very little waste, so not moving resources to a factory that you won't be able to use, though that will happen, as well as exploring areas and placing down meadow tiles, at the same time trying to place them in a way that helps you and not your opponent. So at the end of the game, how does scoring work? Well, if you happen to end the game by placing your 5th building, you get this 2 points from the end of the game card. You get the points listed from any completed contract cards. Any exploitation tokens that you've opened give you points as well. So if I had these 3, which wouldn't be very many, I would get 4 points. Because I've cleared off these 2 meadow tile slots, I get 2 points and 2 points, so 4 points. And if I had, say, 1 resource there, which was left over from a factory when I built a building, that would give me -1 points. So there you go, the Nebula. A light though decent pick up and deliver game with a low rules overhead and a short play time. Even at the full player count of 4, you can get this game played in under an hour. You can play it breezily. The rules are simple enough to enable you to do that. But there's also a surprising amount of depth here when you consider the simplicity of the rules. All in all, with a short play time and good depth to complexity ratio, I can definitely recommend this game. And also, it also plays pretty well as a two-player game. There's a few slight rule changes with the sort of lower player counts, but I played it with 2. Thought it was decent with 2, better with more, though certainly worth playing just as a 2-player game. Plus, if you don't like it, you're done within 45 minutes. Thank you.